Conservation as a National Duty by Theodore Roosevelt. Conservation as a National Duty. Background. President Theodore Roosevelt brought environmental issues to the forefront of the news. The need for forestry and the conservation of wildlife were both prominent issues of the day. Like Gifford Pinchot, a major advocate for conservation and the chief forester of the U.S. Forest Service at the time, Roosevelt praised and supported conservation directives, especially those related to the management and protection of natural resources. Like many modern heroes of conservation, Roosevelt believed in establishing regulations to ensure that the nation managed natural resources wisely and never wasted them. In the speech, Conservation as a National Duty, Roosevelt is urging the governors of the United States to consider conservation of the nation's resources, since the protection of these resources was important in keeping the country powerful. Conservation is a National Duty. Excerpt from a speech by Theodore Roosevelt, Conference of Governors, Washington, D.C., May 13th, 1908. I welcome you to this conference at the White House. You have come hither at my request, so that we may join together to consider the question of the conservation and use of the great fundamental source of wealth of this nation. So vital is this question that for the first time in our history, the chief executive officers of the states separately and of the states together, forming the nation, have met to consider it. It is the chief material question that confronts us, second only and second always to the great fundamental questions of morality. This conference on the conservation of natural resources is, in effect, a meeting of the representatives of all the people of the United States, called to consider the weightiest problem now before the nation. And the occasion for the meeting lies in the fact that the natural resources of our country are in danger of exhaustion if we permit the old wasteful methods of exploiting them longer to continue. With the rise of peoples from savagery to civilization, and with the consequent growth in the extent and variety of the needs of the average man, there comes a steadily increasing growth of the amount demanded by this average man from the actual resources of the country. And yet, rather curiously, at the same time that there comes that increase in what the average man demands from the resources, he is apt to grow to lose the sense of his dependence upon nature. He lives in big cities. He deals in industries that do not bring him close touch with nature. He does not realize the demands he is making upon nature. For instance, he finds, as he has found before in many parts of this country, that it is cheaper to build his house of concrete than of wood, learning in this way only that he has allowed the woods to become exhausted. That is happening, as you know, in parts of this country at this very time. Every step of the progress of mankind is marked by the discovery and use of natural resources previously unused. Without such progressive knowledge and utilization of natural resources, population could not grow, nor industries multiply, nor the hidden wealth of the earth be developed for the benefit of mankind. So these slides in here in the middle are just things that relate to the speech, but were certainly not part of it at that time. Before Theodore Roosevelt, Teddy Roosevelt came as president, we really weren't paying much attention as a nation to our resources, and he made this a really big concern. He was very much an outdoorsman. In this class, we also read from John Muir and about the redwoods, and they knew each other. There's the two of them together. From the first beginnings of civilization, on the banks of the Nile in the Euphrates, the industrial progress of the world has gone on slowly, with occasional setbacks, but on the whole steadily through tens of centuries to the present day. But of late, the rapidity of the process has increased at such a rate that more space has been actually covered during the century and a quarter occupied by our national life than during the preceding 6,000 years that take us back to the earliest monuments of Egypt, to the earliest cities of the Babylonian plain. Now I ask you to think what that means, and I am speaking with historic literalness. In the development, the use, and therefore the exhaustion of certain of the natural resources, the progress has been more rapid in the past century and a quarter than during all the preceding time of which we have record. In Washington's time, anthracite coal was known only as a useless black stone, and the great fields of bituminous coal were undiscovered. As steam was unknown, the use of coal for power production was undreamed of. Water was practically the only source of power, save the labor of men and animals, and this power was used only in the most primitive fashion. But a few small iron deposits had been found in this country, and the use of iron by our countrymen was very small. Wood was practically the only fuel, and what lumber was sawed was consumed locally, while the forests were regarded chiefly as obstructions to settlement and cultivation. The man who cut down a tree was held to have conferred a service upon his fellows. Since then, our knowledge and use of the resources of the present territory of the United States have increased a hundredfold. Indeed, the growth of this nation by leaps and bounds makes one of the most striking and important chapters in the history of the world. Its growth has been due to the rapid development, and alas that it should be said, to the rapid destruction of our natural resources. Nature has supplied to us in the United States, and still supplies to us, more kinds of resources in a more lavish degree than has ever been the case at any other time or with any other people. Our position in the world has been attained by the extent and thoroughness of the control we have achieved over nature, but we are more and not less dependent upon what she furnishes than at any previous time of history since the days of primitive man. The Constitution of the United States thus grew in large part out of the necessity for united action in the wise use of one of our natural resources. The wise use of all of our natural resources, which are our national resources as well, is the great material question of today. I have asked you to come together now because the enormous consumption of these resources and the threat of imminent exhaustion of some of them due to reckless and wasteful use once more calls for common effort, common action. We want to take action that will prevent the advent of a woodless age and defer as long as possible the advent of an ironless age. The steady increasing drain on these natural resources has promoted has promoted to an extraordinary degree the complexity of our industrial and social life. Moreover, this unexampled development has had a determining effect upon the character and opinions of our people. The demand for efficiency in the great task has given us vigor, effectiveness, decision, and power, and a capacity for achievement which in its own lines has never yet been matched. So great and so rapid has been our material growth that there has been a tendency to lag behind in spiritual and moral growth. But that is not the subject upon which I speak to you today. Disregarding for the moment the question of moral purpose, it is safe to say that the prosperity of our people depends directly on the energy and intelligence with which our natural resources are used. It is equally clear that these resources are the final basis of national power and perpetuity. Finally, it is ominously evident that these resources are in the course of rapid exhaustion. We have become great in a material sense because of the lavish use of our resources, and we have just reason to be proud of our growth. But the time has come to inquire seriously what will happen when our forests are gone, when the coal, the iron, the oil, and the gas are exhausted, when the soils shall have been still further impoverished and washed into the streams, polluting the rivers, denuding the fields, and obstructing navigation. These questions do not relate only to the next century or to the next generation. One distinguishing characteristic of really civilized men is foresight. We have to, as a nation, exercise foresight for this nation in the future. And if we do not exercise that foresight, dark will be the future. We should exercise foresight now, as the ordinarily prudent man exercises foresight in conserving and widely using the property which contains the assurance of well being for himself and his children. We want to see a man own his farm rather than rent it, because we want to see it an object to him to transfer it in better order to his children. We want to see him exercise forethought for the next generation. We need to exercise it in some fashion ourselves as a nation for the next generation. The natural resources I have enumerated can be divided into two sharply distinguished classes, accordingly as they are or are not capable of renewal. Mines, if used, must necessarily be exhausted. The minerals do not and cannot renew themselves. Therefore, in dealing with the coal, the oil, the gas, the iron, the metals generally, all that we can do is to try to see that they are wisely used. The exhaustion is certain to come in time. We can trust that it will be deferred long enough to enable the extraordinarily inventive genius of our people to devise means and methods for more or less adequately replacing what is lost. But the exhaustion is sure to come. The second class of resources consists of those which can not only be used in such a manner as to leave them undiminished for our children, but can actually be improved by wise use. The soil, the forests, the waterways come in this category. Everyone knows that a really good farmer leaves his farm more valuable at the end of his life than it was when he first took hold of it. So with the waterways, and so with the forests. In dealing with mineral resources, man is able to improve on nature only by putting the resources to a beneficial use, which in the end exhausts them. But in dealing with the soil and its products, man can improve on nature by compelling the resources to renew and even reconstruct themselves in such manner as to serve increasingly beneficial uses, while the living waters can be so controlled as to multiply their benefits. He talks about two different types of energy: renewable and non renewable. We are coming to recognize as never before the right of the nation to guard its own future in the essential matter of natural resources. In the past, we've admitted the right of the individual to injure the future of the republic for his own present profit. In fact, there has been a good deal of a demand for unrestricted individualism, for the right of the individual to injure the future for all of us for his own temporary and immediate profit. The time has come for a change. As a people, we have the right and the duty, second to none other, but the right and duty of obeying the moral law, of requiring and doing justice, to protect ourselves and our children against the wasteful development of our natural resources, whether that waste is caused by the actual destruction of such resources or by making them impossible of development hereafter. There are signs that both the nation and the states are waking to a realization of this great truth. On March 10th, 1908, the Supreme Court of Maine rendered an exceedingly important judicial decision. This opinion was rendered in response to questions as to the right of the legislature to restrict the cutting of trees on private land for the prevention of droughts and floods, the preservation of the natural water supply, and the prevention of the erosion of such lands, and the consequent filling up of rivers, ponds, and lakes. The forests and water power of Maine constitute the larger part of her wealth and form the basis of her industrial life, and the question submitted by the Maine Senate to the Supreme Court and the answer of the Supreme Court alike bear testimony to the wisdom of the people of Maine, and clearly define a policy of conservation of natural resources, the adoption of which is of vital importance not merely to Maine, but to the whole country. Such a policy will preserve soil, forests, water power, as a heritage for the children and the children's children of the men and women of this generation. For any enactment that provides for the wise utilization of the forests, whether in public or private ownership, and for the conservation of the water resources of the country, must necessarily be legislation that will promote both private and public welfare, for flood prevention, water power development, preservation of the soil, and improvement of navigable rivers are all promoted by such a policy of forest conservation. The opinion of the Maine Supreme Bench sets forth unequivocally the principle that the property rights of the individual are subordinate to the rights of the community, and especially that the waste of wild timber and land derived originally from the state, involving as it would the impoverishment of the state and its people, and thereby defeating a great purpose of government, may properly be prevented by state restrictions. Finally, let us remember that the conservation of our natural resources, though the gravest problem of today, is yet but part of another and greater problem to which this nation is not yet awake, but to which it will awake in time, and with which it must hereafter grapple if it is to live, the problem of national efficiency, the patriotic duty of ensuring the safety and continuance of the nation. When the people of the United States consciously undertake to raise themselves as citizens, and the nation and the states in their several spheres, to the highest pitch of excellence in private, state, and national life, and to do this because it is the first of all the duties of true patriotism, then, and not till then, the future of this nation, in quality and in time, will be assured.